When my husband looked me directly in the eyes and told me I was never allowed to set foot in the house he had just bought, I felt something cold settle in the pit of my stomach. We were sitting in our kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the windows, coffee growing cold between us, and he was speaking to me like I was a stranger, like I was someone who could not be trusted with his secrets. He did not ask me to stay away. He did not suggest it would be better if I gave him space. He forbade me, using that exact word, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard before. Something hard and unyielding that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "I need you to understand this, Claire," he said. His fingers wrapped around his coffee mug so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "The property on Elderwood Lane is mine alone. It is not a space for us. It is not something I want to share. I need you to promise me you will never go there." I stared at him across the table. This man I had been married to for 11 years. This man whose face I knew better than my own, and I did not recognize him. His eyes were distant, guarded, holding secrets I suddenly realized had been building for months, maybe longer. My throat felt tight, my chest constricted, but I managed to speak. "Why would you buy a house and not tell me about it until now? Why would you not want me to see it?" "That is not the point," he said, avoiding my question with the practiced ease of someone who had been rehearsing this conversation. "The point is that I am asking you, as my wife, to respect my privacy. Can you do that?" The word privacy hung in the air between us like privacy. Privacy in a marriage that was supposed to be built on trust and partnership. Privacy about a house, the whole house that he had purchased without my knowledge. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers. But something in his expression, something cold and final, made me swallow my questions and nod slowly. "Fine," I whispered. "I will not go there." He relaxed immediately, his shoulders dropped and his grip on the mug loosened. He even smiled, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Thank you. I knew you would understand. This is important." I pulled my hand away and stood up, unable to bear his touch, unable to sit in that kitchen pretending everything was normal. I walked out of the room, my legs shaking, my mind racing with questions I could not answer. What was in that house? Why was he hiding it from me? And when had my husband become someone capable of looking me in the eye and lying about something so significant? That conversation happened on a Tuesday morning in late September. But the story really begins much earlier, back when I still believed I knew the man I married. Back when I thought our life together was solid and real and built on honesty. 11 years ago, I met David at a fundraiser for the children's hospital where I worked as a pediatric nurse. He was a real estate developer, successful and confident, with dark hair starting to silver at the temples, and a smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing, about our dreams and our pasts, and our hopes for the future. He told me he wanted to build beautiful spaces where families could make memories. I told him I wanted to help children heal. We were both idealists in our own ways, both believers in making the world better. We married a year later in a small ceremony at a vineyard, surrounded by friends and family, promising to love and honor and cherish each other for the rest of our lives. I meant every word of those vows. I believed he did too. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools, planning for the children we hoped to have someday. I worked long shifts at the hospital, coming home exhausted but fulfilled. David worked on development projects, often traveling for days at a time to oversee construction sites or meet with investors. Our life was good. Not perfect, but good. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our comfortable silences. We took vacations to the mountains and the coast. We hosted dinner parties and went to concerts. We talked about our days over dinner, sharing the small victories and frustrations that make up a life. I trusted him completely, never questioning where he went or what he did, because trust was the foundation of everything we had built together. Looking back now, I can see the cracks that were forming, the small shifts that I ignored or explained away. About 2 years ago, David started working even longer hours. He would leave early in the morning and come home late at night. claiming he was managing a particularly complicated development project. He became more protective of his phone, taking it with him even when he went to the bathroom, angling the screen away from me when he checked his messages. He started making mysterious phone calls in the garage or the backyard, his voice low and urgent, ending the conversations abruptly when I appeared. I noticed these things, but I told myself I was being paranoid. David was under stress. The real estate market was unpredictable. He had always been devoted to his work. I had no reason to doubt him, no concrete evidence that anything was wrong. So I pushed down the uneasy feeling in my gut and focused on my own work, on the children who needed me, on maintaining the life we had built. About 6 months ago, things changed more dramatically. David became distant, preoccupied, his mind somewhere else, even when his body was sitting next to me on the couch. He stopped initiating physical closeness, turning away from me at night, making excuses when I reached for him. He forgot our anniversary, something he had never done before, offering a distracted apology when I reminded him 3 days later. He stopped asking about my day, stopped sharing details about his own life, stopped engaging in the small conversations that keep a marriage alive. I tried to talk to him about it, tried to bridge the growing distance between us. One night after dinner, I sat down next to him on the couch and took his hand. "David, I feel like you are pulling away from me, like there is something on your mind that you are not sharing. Can we talk about what is going on?" He looked at me with an expression I could not read, something between guilt and irritation. "Nothing is going on. I'm just busy with work. You are overthinking things. I am not overthinking. I am your wife. I can tell when something is wrong. Claire, please. I do not want to have this conversation right now. I am tired. Can we just watch the show?" He turned back to the television, dismissing me, shutting down the conversation before it could begin. I sat there beside him, feeling more alone than I had ever felt, even in his presence. That night marked a turning point for me. I realized that the man I married was disappearing, being replaced by someone I did not know, someone who kept secrets and built walls and pushed me away. I started paying closer attention after that. I noticed that he was gone most weekends now, claiming he needed to visit construction sites or meet with contractors. I noticed charges on our credit card for hardware stores and furniture retailers, purchases I knew nothing about. I noticed that he was taking phone calls at odd hours, stepping outside even in the rain to have private conversations. I noticed everything, but I did not confront him. I was afraid of what I might discover, afraid that voicing my suspicions would make them real. Then came that Tuesday morning when he told me about the house on Elderwood Lane, when he forbade me from going there, when the secret life he had been building was finally acknowledged but not explained. After that conversation, I tried to continue as if everything was normal. I went to work, I came home, I made dinner. I slept in the same bed as a man who felt like a stranger, but inside, I was unraveling, consumed by questions and fears, and a growing certainty that something terrible was happening. I tried to respect his demand. I tried to stay away from that house, to trust that he had legitimate reasons for his secrecy. But the wondering ate at me. What was in that house? Was he hiding another woman there? Was he planning to leave me? Was he involved in something illegal? The possibilities spiraled through my mind at night when I could not sleep, each scenario worse than the last. 3 days after that conversation, I drove past Elderwood Lane on my way home from work. I told myself I was just curious, that I would not stop, that I would just look. The house was at the end of a quiet street, lined with old oak trees, a beautiful Victorian structure painted pale blue with white trim, a wraparound porch, and a tower room on the 3rd floor. It looked like something from a fairy tale, charming and inviting. Nothing sinister about it. David's car was in the driveway. I slowed down, my heart pounding, wanting desperately to pull over, to walk up to that door to demand answers. But I kept driving, honoring the promise I had made, even though every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn around. That weekend, David left Saturday morning saying he had to oversee an inspection at a property upstate. He kissed my forehead absently, grabbed his overnight bag, and walked out the door. I watched him drive away from the living room window, waiting until his car disappeared around the corner. Then I stood there trying to decide what to do. I had sacrificed so much for this marriage. I had put my career on hold when David needed to relocate for a major project, leaving a position I loved at the hospital to start over in a new city. I had supported him through failed developments and financial setbacks, using my savings to help keep his business afloat when investors pulled out. I had endured lonely nights and canceled plans and broken promises, telling myself that his work was important, that he was building our future. I had forgiven small betrayals and dismissals and moments of thoughtlessness, believing that love meant giving people grace. I had poured everything into being a good wife, a supportive partner, a woman who trusted and believed and stood by her man. And now, he had a secret house he forbade me from entering. Now he lied about his whereabouts and hid his phone and built a life I was not allowed to be part of. The unfairness of it hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless with anger and hurt. I made a decision in that moment. I was done being obedient. I was done trusting blindly. I was done sacrificing my peace of mind for a man who clearly had no respect for me. I grabbed my purse and my keys and drove to Elderwood Lane. The house looked even more beautiful up close. The garden was meticulously maintained, with late blooming roses and ornamental grasses swaying in the autumn breeze. The porch had a swing and potted mums in shades of rust and gold. Everything about it was inviting, welcoming, the kind of place where a family should live. I walked up the steps, my legs shaking, my heart hammering in my chest. The front door was locked, but I tried the handle anyway. Part of me hoping it would open, part of me terrified of what I would find inside. I walked around to the back of the house, peering through windows, trying to see past the curtains. The kitchen was visible through one window, a beautiful space with white cabinets and marble counters and copper pots hanging from a rack. It looked barely used, pristine and staged. I moved to another window and saw a living room with antique furniture and oil paintings on the walls. Everything tasteful and expensive and utterly impersonal. Then I came to a window on the side of the house, partially obscured by overgrown bushes. I pushed the branches aside and looked in, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was a bedroom, but not just any bedroom. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, hundreds of them, and every single one was of me. I pressed my face against the glass, trying to see more clearly, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. There were photos from our wedding, photos from vacations, photos of me at work in my scrubs, photos of me grocery shopping, photos of me walking in the park. Some of them I recognized, pictures we had taken together or that friends had shared, but others I had never seen before, candid shots taken without my knowledge, photos of me captured in private moments when I thought I was alone. My hands started shaking so badly I had to step back from the window. I felt dizzy, disoriented, like the world had tilted sideways. What was this room? Why did David have a shrine to me hidden in a secret house? Nothing about this made sense. Nothing about this was normal or healthy or explainable. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and took pictures of what I could see through the window, documenting the evidence, my mind racing through possibilities. Was David obsessed with me? Was this some twisted expression of love? Or was something darker happening, something I could not begin to understand? I left the house and sat in my car at the end of the street, trying to calm my breathing, trying to think clearly. I needed to get inside that house. I needed to see everything. I needed to understand what was happening. But I could not just break in. I needed a key, or I needed David to be gone long enough for me to find another way inside. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning with questions and fears. That night I lay in bed unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the empty house. David called around 10 to say he was staying overnight at a hotel near the property he was inspecting. I wondered if he was actually at the house on Elderwood Lane, standing in that room surrounded by pictures of me, doing whatever it was he did there. Over the next week, I became someone I did not recognize. I started searching through David's things when he was at work, looking for clues, looking for keys, looking for anything that would help me understand. I found a ring of keys in his desk drawer. Several I did not recognize. I photographed them, planning to have copies made. I checked his browser history on the computer in his office, finding searches for surveillance equipment and photo printing services, and something that made my stomach turn, searches for how to hide assets during a divorce. That discovery changed everything. David was not just keeping secrets. He was planning something, preparing for something. And whatever it was, he was making sure I would be left with nothing. The photographs, the secret house, the hidden preparations, it all added up to something sinister, something calculated, something that made me realize I was in danger in ways I had not understood. I needed help. I needed someone I could trust. I called my sister Monica, asking her to meet me for coffee. We sat in a crowded cafe where I felt safe, where David couldn't appear unexpectedly, and I told her everything. I showed her the photos I had taken through the window, the evidence of David's searches, the strange pattern of his behavior over the past months. Monica listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker as I talked. When I finished, she reached across the table and gripped my hand tightly. "Claire, you need to get out of that house. You need to file for divorce. This is not normal. This is not safe. Whatever is going on with David, you cannot stay married to him. But I do not understand why. Why would he do this? What does it mean? It does not matter why. What matters is that your husband has a secret house full of pictures of you that he forbade you from seeing. What matters is that he is planning to divorce you and hide money. What matters is that you are not safe. Please, let me help you. Let me call my attorney. Let me get you somewhere David cannot find you." I knew she was right, but I could not leave yet. Not until I understood. Not until I knew what was in that house beyond the one room I had seen. Not until I had answers to the questions that were consuming me. I told Monica I needed a few more days, that I needed to gather more evidence, that I needed to be sure before I blew up my entire life. She made me promise to be careful, to check in with her every day, to leave immediately if I felt threatened. I promised, even though I had no intention of leaving until I knew the truth. 2 days later, I had copies made of the keys I had found in David's desk. That evening, after David left for what he said was a dinner meeting with investors, I drove back to Elderwood Lane. The street was quiet, the autumn darkness settling early, the house standing silent and seemingly empty. I parked a block away and walked to the house, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The first key I tried did not work. Neither did the second. But the third key slid into the lock and turned with a quiet click. The door swung open and I stepped inside the secret house my husband had forbidden me to enter. The air inside was cool and still, carrying a faint scent of wood polish and something floral I could not identify. I closed the door behind me and stood in the foyer, taking in my surroundings. The interior was even more beautiful than what I had glimpsed through the windows. All original woodwork and stained glass and careful restoration. But there was something sterile about it, something that felt more like a museum than a home. I moved through the first floor slowly, taking everything in. The living room with its antique furniture and oil paintings, the dining room with a table set for two, china and crystal gleaming in the dim light from the street, the kitchen with its modern appliances and copper pots, and a refrigerator that was empty except for a few bottles of water. Nothing personal. Nothing that suggested David actually spent time here. Nothing that explained why this house existed. Then I found the stairs and climbed to the second floor. There were 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, all beautifully decorated, all strangely impersonal. I opened closets and found them empty. I checked drawers and found nothing. The house felt like a stage set, beautiful but hollow, waiting for actors who had not yet arrived. The door at the end of the hallway was locked. I tried several keys before finding one that worked, and when the door opened, I stepped into the room I had seen through the window. The room covered in photographs of me. Standing inside, it was different from viewing it through glass. The sheer number of images was overwhelming, covering every available inch of wall space. I walked slowly around the room, studying the photographs, trying to understand their pattern, their purpose. Some were formal portraits from our wedding or professional events. but most were candid shots, capturing me in everyday moments. Me laughing with a colleague at the hospital, me reading on the couch, me sleeping, me crying, me existing through years of my life, documented and displayed like specimens in a collection. In the corner of the room stood a desk with a computer. I sat down and turned it on, my hands shaking. The computer was not password protected, which surprised me until I realized David never expected anyone to find this place. I opened the file folders and started clicking through them, and what I found made everything so much worse. There were hundreds more photographs, organized by date, going back years. Some dated from before I met David. Pictures of me from college, from my early 20s, from times in my life when I had not known him. He had been watching me for years before we met, documenting my life, collecting information about me like I was a project or an obsession. There were files full of notes, detailed observations about my routines, my preferences, my relationships. He had documented where I worked, where I shopped, what time I went to the gym, who my friends were. He had recorded conversations I had had with people, somehow obtaining transcripts or recordings. He had tracked my movements, my activities, my entire existence, and he had been doing it for at least 15 years. I found planning documents next, meticulously detailed strategies for how he would approach me, how he would engineer our meeting at that fundraiser, how he would court me and win my trust and convince me to marry him. Our entire relationship had been orchestrated, planned, executed like a military operation. Nothing about us had been organic or real or based on genuine connection. I was a target, and he had been hunting me. But why? That was the question that kept echoing through my mind as I scrolled through file after file of obsessive documentation. Why me? What had made him fixate on me to this degree? What was the purpose of all this planning and surveillance and deception? I found the answer in a folder labeled simply Project Claire. Inside were documents outlining an inheritance I had coming from my grandmother's estate. My grandmother had died when I was 19, leaving a complicated trust that was not set to pay out until I turned 35. The inheritance was substantial, several $million, money I had honestly forgotten about because it seemed so distant and abstract. But David had not forgotten. David had known about it before he even met me. He had researched my family, discovered the trust, and made a plan to marry me so he could access that money. The documents laid it all out in cold, calculated detail. He would court me, marry me, establish himself as my husband and financial partner. He would wait until the inheritance paid out, which according to the trust documents would happen in 3 months. Then he would divorce me, but not before ensuring the inheritance was transferred into joint accounts he controlled. The searches I had found about hiding assets made sense now. He was preparing to take everything and leave me with nothing, just as he had always planned. I sat in that chair, reading document after document, feeling like I was looking at my entire life from the outside, seeing it for the manipulation it had been. Every moment I had thought was real had been choreographed. Every word of love had been a lie. Every tender gesture had been calculated to achieve a specific goal. I was not David's wife. I was his mark, his target, his victim. The room started to spin. I put my head between my knees, trying not to pass out, trying to breathe through the crushing realization that my entire adult life had been based on a lie. 11 years of marriage, 11 years of trust and intimacy and partnership. All of it fake, all of it manipulation, all of it part of a con to steal my grandmother's money. I do not know how long I sat there. Minutes, hours. Time lost meaning in that room full of lies. Eventually I stood up, my legs shaking, but my mind suddenly terrifyingly clear. I pulled out my phone and photographed everything. Every document, every file name, every piece of evidence. I copied files onto a USB drive I found in the desk drawer. I documented everything I could, working methodically, my shock transforming into cold, focused determination. When I had everything I needed, I left the house, locking the door behind me carefully. making sure there was no sign I had been there. I drove home in the darkness, my mind already formulating a plan. David thought he was the only one capable of strategy and deception. He thought I was just a naive target, someone to be manipulated and used. He had no idea who he was dealing with now. I spent that night researching. I found the best divorce attorneys in the state, reading reviews, checking credentials, looking for someone ruthless and experienced. I found the contact information for a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud. I made lists of all our assets, all our accounts, everything I would need to protect myself. I worked until dawn, fueled by rage and betrayal and a determination to not be a victim. David came home the next morning looking tired but satisfied, probably believing his plan was proceeding smoothly. He kissed my cheek absently and asked what I wanted for dinner that night. I smiled and suggested his favorite meal, playing the role of dutiful wife one more time, giving him no indication that anything had changed. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone new. On the surface, I was the same Claire, going to work, coming home, making dinner, sleeping beside a man I now knew was a predator. But underneath, I was building a case against him, gathering evidence, consulting with attorneys and investigators, preparing for war. The private investigator I hired was a woman named Jessica, who had spent 20 years in law enforcement before opening her own firm. I met with her in her office and laid out everything I had discovered. She listened without expression, taking notes, asking pointed questions about timelines and documentation. "This is one of the most calculated cases of marriage fraud I have seen," she said when I finished. "The good news is that you have incredible documentation of his intent. The bad news is that he is clearly intelligent and has been planning this for years. We need to move carefully and quickly." She started digging into David's finances, tracing accounts and assets I did not know existed. What she found was staggering. David had been siphoning money from his business for years, hiding it in offshore accounts and shell corporations. He had taken out loans against properties using forged documents. He had committed fraud on a massive scale, using his real estate business as a cover for financial crimes that went far beyond stealing from me. "He is not just planning to divorce you and take your inheritance," Jessica explained during one of our meetings. "He is preparing to disappear. He has multiple passports, plane tickets to countries without extradition treaties, and enough hidden money to live comfortably for the rest of his life. You were never just about the money. You were his cover, his legitimacy, his way of appearing normal while he built his exit strategy." The revelation should have devastated me, but instead, it crystallized my resolve. I was not just fighting for my inheritance or my assets. I was fighting to make sure David faced consequences for everything he had done. Not just to me, but to the investors he had defrauded, to the business partners he had betrayed, to every person who had trusted him. My attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia, who reminded me of a predatory bird, filed for divorce 3 weeks after I discovered the truth. David was served papers at his office in front of his colleagues, the way he had always feared public embarrassment. He came home that evening furious, his face red, his hands shaking. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, waving the papers at me. I was sitting calmly on the couch, a glass of wine in my hand, looking at him with an expression I had practiced in the mirror. Cool, unmoved, powerful. "It is a divorce petition. I am divorcing you. You cannot just divorce me without discussing it. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out what happened to us." I laughed, a sound without humor. "What happened to us?" "Nothing happened to us, David, because there never was an us. There was only your plan, and I'm done being part of it." His expression shifted from anger to confusion to something calculating. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Claire, are you having some kind of breakdown? Is this about the house? Because I can explain." "The house on Elderwood Lane? The one with a room full of photographs of me? The one with the computer documenting 15 years of surveillance and manipulation? The one containing detailed plans for how you would steal my grandmother's inheritance and disappear? That house?" The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth and closed it, struggling to find words, to construct a lie that could explain what I had discovered. There was no lie big enough. I went there, David. I saw everything. I copied everything. And I've turned everything over to my attorney and to a private investigator who has been very interested in your offshore accounts and your forged documents and your plans to flee the country. He sank into a chair, his face gray, his hands trembling. You were never supposed to know. You were never supposed to find out. That is your concern? Not that you destroyed my life, but that I discovered it. You are even worse than I thought. It was not personal, he said weakly. It was just business. A way to secure my future. You married me as business. You pretended to love me for 11 years as business. You planned to steal everything from me as business. Do you even hear yourself? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something like fear in his eyes. What are you going to do? I'm going to destroy you, I said calmly. I'm going to make sure you pay for everything you have done. I'm going to take every penny you stole, every asset you hid, every escape route you planned, and I am going to burn it all down. And then I'm going to watch you face criminal charges for fraud and identity theft, and whatever else the prosecutors can make stick. You wanted to ruin my life? Congratulations. You just ruined your own. He tried to negotiate after that, offering to split assets fairly, promising to disappear quietly if I did not press charges, pleading for mercy he had never intended to show me. I listened to him beg with the same cold detachment he must have felt while planning my destruction. Then I told him to leave and never come back. The divorce proceedings were brutal in public. Patricia filed motions to freeze all of David's assets, presenting evidence of his fraud and his plans to flee. The court granted restraining orders and asset freezes. Federal investigators got involved based on the evidence of financial crimes. David's business collapsed as partners and investors discovered his deceptions. His reputation was destroyed. His freedom was threatened. Throughout it all, I maintained my composure. I went to work. I attended depositions and hearings. I answered questions from investigators. I reclaimed my life piece by piece, stripping away everything David had contaminated, rebuilding on a foundation of truth instead of lies. The house on Elderwood Lane became evidence in the criminal case against him. I went back there one more time with Jessica and the federal agents, walking through those rooms with new eyes, seeing them not as a shrine to obsession, but as the scene of a crime. The agents photographed everything, cataloged everything, documented the extent of David's surveillance and planning. The room full of my pictures was dismantled, the photographs seized as evidence, the computer taken away to be analyzed. Standing in that empty room afterward, I felt something shift inside me. The fear and betrayal and hurt began to transform into something else. Power, freedom, clarity. David had tried to control every aspect of my life, but he had failed. I had discovered the truth. I had fought back. I had won. The divorce was finalized 6 months after I filed. I received everything, every asset, every account, every penny David had stolen from others and tried to steal from me, my grandmother's inheritance, which came through shortly before the final hearing, went directly into accounts David could never touch. He received nothing except a criminal conviction for fraud, forgery, and identity theft. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. On the day of his sentencing, I sat in the courtroom and watched as he was led away in handcuffs. He looked at me once, his eyes full of something I could not identify. Regret, maybe, or just anger at being caught. I looked back at him with no emotion at all. He was nothing to me now, just a criminal, just a mistake, just a chapter in my life that was finally, mercifully over. In the year after the divorce, I rebuilt everything. I left the house we had shared and bought a small cottage near the ocean, a place that was entirely mine, decorated with things I chose, filled with memories I controlled. I went back to school and got my master's degree in nursing. I started volunteering with organizations that help women escape abusive relationships, using my experience to help others recognize manipulation and control. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with during my marriage, realizing how David had systematically isolated me from people who might have seen through his facade. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see, but had never visited because David had always had other plans. I started painting again, something I had loved as a child, but had abandoned because David said it was a waste of time. I reclaimed every piece of myself he had tried to control. Monica became my closest confidant and supporter, proud of how I had fought back, amazed by my strength. She threw me a party on the 1-year anniversary of my divorce filing, gathering friends and family to celebrate my freedom. Standing in her backyard, surrounded by people who genuinely loved me, I realized how much my life had changed. I was no longer the woman who had been manipulated and used. I was someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who would never be a victim again. The money from my grandmother's inheritance allowed me to establish a foundation in her name, supporting programs that helped women gain financial independence and escape controlling relationships. It felt right to use the money David had coveted for something that would have horrified him, turning his greed into something that actually helped people. Every grant we awarded, every woman we helped, felt like another victory over the man who had tried to destroy me. I started dating again eventually, cautiously, with clear boundaries and a much better understanding of red flags. I met a man named Thomas who was kind and genuine and had no interest in controlling me. He was a teacher with a rescue dog and a love of hiking and absolutely no secret houses full of surveillance equipment. We took things slowly, building trust gradually, and I found myself capable of opening up again, of believing in connection again, even after everything I had been through. 2 years after my divorce was finalized, I received a letter from David. He had been in prison for over a year, and apparently he wanted to apologize. I debated whether to read it, whether to give him any space in my mind after working so hard to evict him from my thoughts. Eventually, curiosity won. I opened the letter and read his carefully composed words about how sorry he was, how he had been motivated by greed and fear, how he hoped I could forgive him someday. I read it once, then burned it in the fireplace of my cottage, watching the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. Forgiveness was not something he deserved or I needed to give. He had made his choices. He was facing his consequences. My life had moved forward without him, better and fuller and more authentic than it had ever been when he was part of it. I kept the house on Elderwood Lane. After it was released from evidence, I could have sold it, could have erased that reminder of David's obsession from my life. But instead, I transformed it. I hired contractors to renovate every room, removing all traces of what it had been, turning it into something new. The room that had held the photographs became a library, lined with books, filled with natural light, a space for learning and growth instead of surveillance and control. I turned the house into a residence for women leaving abusive relationships, a place where they could stay temporarily while they rebuilt their lives, a safe space free from the control of the men who had hurt them. The foundation funded it, and volunteers helped run it, and women who needed sanctuary found it there. The house David had used as a monument to his obsession became a symbol of survival and strength. On the day we opened it, I stood on that wraparound porch where I had once stood terrified and confused, and I felt nothing but pride. This was my revenge, more complete than any legal victory. I had taken David's most sinister creation and turned it into something that actively worked against everything he represented. Every woman who found safety there was a rejection of his values, his choices, his worldview. I named it Elderwood House, and I made sure David knew about it. I sent him a letter at the prison, including photos of the renovation, descriptions of the programs we offered, testimonials from women we had helped. I wanted him to know that his plan had failed so completely that it had actually created something good, something that would outlast him, something that would help people long after he was forgotten. I never received a response, and I did not need one. The letter was not about communication. It was about making sure he understood that I had won, completely and permanently, in every way that mattered. 3 years after I discovered the truth, I stood in my cottage looking out at the ocean, drinking coffee, watching the morning sun paint the water gold and pink. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who had trusted blindly and loved naively and believed that her marriage was real. That woman was gone, transformed by betrayal into someone harder and wiser and infinitely stronger. I thought about David in his prison cell, facing years of consequences for his crimes, his elaborate plans reduced to nothing, his freedom stolen the way he had tried to steal mine. I felt no satisfaction in his suffering, but no sympathy either. He had made choices. Consequences had followed. That was justice, simple and complete. I thought about all the women at Elderwood House, sleeping safely for the first time in months or years, beginning the process of rebuilding their lives, finding strength they did not know they had. Each one of them was a piece of my healing, a reminder that something good could come from even the darkest experiences. I thought about my life now, full of genuine relationships and meaningful work and authentic joy. I had lost 11 years to David's deception, but I had gained something more valuable in return. I had gained myself. I had discovered what I was capable of, how strong I could be, how completely I could rebuild after everything was destroyed. I had learned that I did not need someone else to complete me or protect me or give my life meaning. I was enough on my own. I was more than enough. Today, I learned that the worst betrayals can become the greatest transformations, that discovering your life is a lie can be the beginning of discovering your truth, that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters. I learned that strength is not about never being hurt. It is about what you do after the hurt, how you rise from the ashes, how you refuse to let cruelty define you. I learned that love should never require surveillance or control or secrecy, that real partnership is built on trust and honesty and mutual respect, that anyone who forbids you from knowing the truth about your own life is not protecting you, but controlling you. I learned to trust my instincts, to investigate my doubts, to never ignore the warnings my gut provides. I learned that revenge is not about destruction. It is about transformation. It is about taking what was meant to harm you and turning it into something that heals others. It is about refusing to be a victim and choosing instead to be a survivor, a fighter, a force for good in a world that needs more of that. And I learned that sometimes the secret someone is keeping is not just about who they are. It is about who they think you are, weak and controllable and easily manipulated. The greatest victory is proving them catastrophically wrong. Have you ever discovered a secret that changed everything about your life? Have you ever had to rebuild after betrayal? What did you learn about yourself in the process? Share your story in the comments below and let us know how you found strength when everything fell apart.